I'll concede your point just for brevity. But
What? Brevity? We don't do that around here. It's probably
No.
Citrus, or what is a Capital One Bowl? It used to be Citrus Bowl, right?
oh my
Capital
God,
One.
dude, where have you been?
I just like the real name.
It hasn't been the Citrus Bowl since 2002?
What was your highlight side dish from Thanksgiving?
Oh gosh, Scotch.
This is the Buck Around, the podcast devoted to all things Wisconsin Badger football from a fan perspective. Featuring your hosts, Richard Branch and Maxwell Brusky.
And hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Buck Around. Welcome back to episode 306 of the Buck Around. I need to pace myself. I'm talking too fast. I am one half. Well, actually, I'm all of the traditional Buck Around today for episode 306, if I didn't say that. Yeah, the name's Richard Branch. Wow, I'm all over the place here because I'm thrown off. Because as we mentioned last week, my beloved co-host is not around this week. He is traveling off in the ether doing, real life stuff. But I am joined by a special guest today to help me navigate the waters of late February college football. Friend of the show, Prop Bet Andy. Andy Schaff, how are you, sir? Thank you for
Doing
stepping
good, Rich.
in.
How you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Well, you're a nice guy to come in here, find a little conference room in the office, and join me to talk about really important things like, walk-on kickers and things like that. So I'm glad that you have your priorities straight. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, pretty great. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Always wanted to be on. I'm really glad you waited until the end of February when absolutely nothing is happening in the Badger world, so people can skip this one. But yeah, happy to come on. Also glad you finally have a Madison resident on. I know that's been a big concern. We have
Yes.
Illinois and out east. So I guess I'll start. I got a couple local color things that you're not going to get from, Max. I guess two things. I saw Owen Arnett on a moped near campus, and I saw Longo at a basketball game with his kid. So, these are just two things you get from me, a Madison resident, just being a man of the people, being out. So Owen Arnett and Longo, there you go.
It's called, it's human intelligence, right? Like your eyeballs on the ground. We do appreciate that. The closest I get is Chase Wolf's LinkedIn page. Or Charles, excuse me. Wolf's LinkedIn page, and people sending me flyers from new real estate agents who used to be special teams players in 2013. So I do appreciate something a little more human, a little more you can reach out and touch than stuff in the digital ether. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks. And again, just to clarify, I did not touch Longo. I thought about it, but I kind of just let him and his kid enjoy the basketball game.
I meant more in the what do you call it, like metaphorical sense. Not literally touching Phil Longo. I don't encourage that. Just for the record, the podcast has an anti-touching policy. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of the day, I did need to point out one thing to everybody. Just in case you listened to the last episode and you started to go crazy as Max slowly faded off into the ether, to keep using that word today, we are aware of the issue. I have no idea what that was. That was like the boiling frog of audio, and Max had some kind of wonky mic issue that it happened so slowly we didn't even notice it during the show. So I didn't really notice it at the end, but we fixed it as best we could. It won't happen again. We had technical issues. But if you thought you were going crazy, you were not. But I know a couple people reached out about it. And if you noticed it and didn't reach out, know that it was noticed by us. So apologies for that. I think we should be good today. And we'll go from there. So let's get into it. We're almost 4 minutes into this thing, Andy, and people are not interested in our witty banter. They're interested in our Badger banter, if you will. I'd say the second biggest story of the week was, and we'll work our way up to the big ones, obviously. Most notably being your spreadsheet, because you are a guest who brought the goods. But Badgers added another portal player in the last week, Johnny Smith from Portland State. The talk is kickoff specialist. He's a walk-on. He's a grad transfer, so he's another 1-year kind of rental type. I don't know. What do you think, Andy? Are you surprised by this? Did it? I mean, they did kind of hunt and peck a little bit for a kickoff guy last year, right? Because they started with Van Dyke, who is gone now, but he lost the job because he couldn't keep the ball in bounds. I forgot that Vakos actually got a couple games to kick off, basically when Van Dyke started putting the ball out of bounds, and it was okay, but they didn't seem to be big on it, and maybe that's what got him hurt. And then Gavin Lom took it over from there and seemed to hold the job down. But I don't know. What do you think? I mean, what was your take from that? Because I'll be honest, I didn't see that coming. Like, I didn't think they were on the hunt for a kickoff guy.
I guess I'm not too surprised. It does feel like Fickle doesn't like to leave special teams up for chance. They brought in that portal long snapper. Do you remember his name off the top of your head? I'll help you out. Kaysen Pfeiffer, I believe.
Kaysen Pfeiffer.
So they brought in him to do long snapping. He went out and got the Australian punter last year. He got Vakos as well. All these are positions that sometimes, they had some guys there that they could have done a walk-on kind of competition for to see who would percolate it up. But Fickle seems like he doesn't like to keep special teams to chance. So I guess I'm not super surprised that he went out and got somebody. Do hope this works a little bit better than the Vito Calvaruso experiment back in 2021. And I don't know. Do you think he is going to share the couch on Rafa Gaglioni's apartment like Vito did, or is he going to be finding his own lodging? Is my main question here.
Well,
I guess where do you fall on this?
Yeah, I guess where I fall, the thing that I find intriguing is, one, like, I don't think Lom was terrible, right? He kicked off the ball 32 times last year, 12 touchbacks. He only put it out of bounds once. And he seemed to sort of settle in. Like, I mean, even if Van Dyke had eligibility remaining, I think we saw the end of that saga. But I'm puzzled about this on two fronts. One, this guy Smith, who's transferring in, was really good he was good on kickoffs last year. 63. He got a touchback 45 times, which is legit. I mean, that's 2/3 of the time versus 1/3 of the time for Lom, which I think that's the bigger part. I'm wondering with Fickle it's just he's looking for a consistent long leg, so they don't have to keep trying to put the ball. They got so cute last year putting the ball in the corner, and I think that's kind of what did Van Dyke in, because he just wasn't accurate enough for it. He didn't quite have the leg to get the touchback consistently enough, so they kind of wanted him to do the kickoff version of a coffin corner, right? And wasn't able to do it. So I think this guy, theoretically, has just got a big enough boot to put it out the back. You kick it straight down. You don't think about it. The one part that intrigued me about him was he was 8 of 9 on field goals this last season. That Portland State, for whatever reason, didn't kick a lot. They went 5 and 7. I mean, they think they gave 81 points up to Oregon, so they weren't exactly a stellar FCS team. But the guy hit every field goal inside of 50, and his only miss was from 55. So it was 52 yards, and he made one from 55. He was 2 for 3 over 50. So he could kick, theoretically. So I'm kind of interested that he took this, just because I don't think you're going to keep Vakos around and have a real competition at kicker. So, I mean, I guess it's a plus pickup, but I guess I never really thought about it the way you did. He is big on special teams and has 3 scholarships out there that you don't always see with the Badgers, especially a long snapper, albeit another 1-year rental. But
yeah, I remember just on Twitter there are some people kind of miffed that they even use a scholarship on a long snapper. And I haven't followed too closely. Is this kicker going to be a walk-on, or are they committing a scholarship, or we don't know?
Walk-on. I think.
Okay.
I mean, my assumption in the sell is you're coming in as a walk-on, but if you win the if you win the kickoff job this spring, Vakos is looking for a home and you're getting his. But I don't see that. I don't know about you. I don't see that happening. That's the only part that I thought was interesting, that the guy took it.
I mean, maybe there's some NIL money they can help make him whole, or some fun stuff like that. But
things that we really love talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to try it. And kickoffs did get a little hairy last year. Just I think we had one of the game spacing. We had a returner for a touchdown, got taken back by penalty. Couple, I know at Ohio State they started at the 35 to start the game. Just kind of one-off stuff like that I'm sure drove Fickle insane. So I guess I'm not too surprised that they try to upgrade it. But yeah, even timing-wise, end of February, it doesn't seem like this guy's a huge priority. And if it doesn't work, then they're not out much. I
No.
don't think.
He's a total flyer. I think that's there's no downside. I think you're right. So let's move to the bigger news of the week. EJ Whitlow is the new defensive line coach. They took him from Air Force. Air Force, they love to crow about their defensive stats from the past year. I don't really have any context for it. Who knows? He was there for 2 years. He was at Miami of Ohio for 3 or 4 years before that. Had a couple guys end up in the NFL from there, which I think is reasonable. And then obviously his connection to the Badger staff is Matt Mitchell, because he was working under Matt Mitchell at Grand Valley State when Matt Mitchell was head coach there from 2014 to 2017. Aside from being a dude, I mean, all these guys are dudes. Is there anything like, what does this mean? That's the question of the show always. All right, they got a defensive line coach. We all know that, but what does it mean? What does it mean to you?
Again, February, you bring me on to talk defensive line coach. I don't have any big takeaways. He kind of feels like the Fickle prototype. I don't know his age exactly. It looked like he probably graduated college in 2009 from what I could tell. So probably late 30s ish. So young guy, has moved around, probably wants to improve his career, probably seems like a mover. This will not be his last stop from what I can tell in an ideal world. But I don't know. He feels kind of similar to Scruggs to me in a little bit. And I don't know. I liked his picture that came out where he's wearing like the big floppy hat with the big padded armbands, just like look like the most defensive line coach I've ever possibly seen. So I don't know. He seems kind of in the same mold as Scruggs to me. Hard to tell with recruiting. Obviously Air Force is its whole different animal and he's at MAC level, but I mean, his recruiting is going to improve just by being at Wisconsin. So recruiting is going to be the big thing there. And it just is so hard to tell with these guys until they actually get some reps and you can see kind of what connections they're making. So I guess I don't really care about Air Force's defensive line or what he's done with guys developing. It's hard to tell how much of that's talent, how much of that is a coach. So I don't know. He seems like the kind of guy I thought I would get. Is that kind of where you land as well?
The 2 parts I would add to it is he feels very much like a late February hire. This would probably be, if Fickle was looking for a defensive line coach in January, I feel like this might be a guy he'd interview if he missed his A or B guy. And this is probably working his way down the Rolodex, is my guess, a little bit, just because of who's willing to move at this time of year. It all ties into the coach season. And I get a big chunk of it is, you have arguably the greatest college football coach in history sort of retire without anybody knowing right at the end of the season, which blew up a blue blood program and shifted everything around. And then you have the guy who won the national title basically waiting a month to decide whether or not he's aiming. So I get some of the calendars getting pushed back because of that, but still, it's like the calendar is so stretched out now that I feel like they have to get a little bit more creative in finding guys. And I'll give them a little bit of a, when you're grading on that curve, it's a creative idea to have a guy like Mitchell on staff who has a long, he was a head coach for a better part of a decade. I forget how many, it's like 7 or 8 years, right? So he's had a lot of guys work for him. And this is, to me, clearly, hey, this guy used to, work for me 10 years ago. He's good. Go grab him. It's nice to have that resource in Mitchell to let you dip down a little bit. I think you and I talked about it actually offline a little bit. The nice thing about, Forkerine came from him, but also he has a network there to know which of these kids down low, can play up. And I think this is kind of another part of it is if you're going to have this coaching calendar be this long, you need to be able to dig a little deeper to find guys, because this is definitely a guy you had to dig for. Like you said, maybe he's Greg Scruggs 3 years ago type of thing, because Scruggs was an assistant coach on Cincinnati before he became the second coming of Jesus at defensive line coach in a lot of people's eyes. So, is the guy going to stay forever? No, he's here 2.5 years, right? That's your over-under. Probably taking the under. But yeah, I think just to me, it's what you expect. I don't see, they weren't going to get Mike Vrabel to be the defensive line coach. So it's fine by me. So I have no take on it other than, yeah, that's about right. And yeah, this coaching carousel stretching as long as it is weird because it may keep spinning because Georgia is now going to need a running back coach and all these blue bloods they can pull guys later. So maybe somebody gets pulled and then another Badger gets pulled and We may be doing this again in 2 weeks, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I think they kind of had two options. I mean, one option would try to be to steal somebody else, outbid, pull someone from a different program. I don't think this was the spot for them to really do that, and I don't even know who was available. And obviously, they didn't like promote from within, like pull a Nate Letton when they moved him to tight end. So it does seem like they at least tried to. They put some work into it and didn't just bring up the next man. So I guess I'm kind of optimistic for that at least. I don't know. We'll see. Like you said, it's judging assistants even while they're on the team is impossible, much less, before they even get here. So,
I mean, to your point, and it's not to bash, but like this is a better hire than Al Johnson at running back coach, and it's late in the cycle. You know what I mean? So I'll give them, this is a passing grade, right? I mean, with what you're working with and what I was saying, I think on the last pod, the thing they're still doing is they're paying 2 offensive line coaches still. So I don't think they can do like a big splashy hire. So to poach this late, because you're going to have to really sweeten it, right? Because that's what I'm assuming. We don't know Michigan's contract with Scruggs yet, but they had to sweeten the pot somehow to get him to move that late. But let's get to the part that I'm really excited about. You, sir, came with a spreadsheet. And if anyone knows anything on this podcast, it's that I love spreadsheets. I'm a little disappointed it's in Google Sheets because that makes it too easy to look at and share. You need to do it in proprietary weird Apple stuff. I mean, get with the program, Andy. But you wanted to talk about assistants mostly. Well, I don't know why. I want to hear. I'm here to sit and listen. This is the best thing when guests come on the show and they talk and I get to do nothing. So fill our airwaves, Andy.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is my two passions, stupid spreadsheets about the Badgers and then bizarre theories. So I just want to talk about assistants. So I guess in your mind, Rich, what makes a good assistant? Are you more focused on how the recruits come in, development? I guess when you look at assistants and you're like, is it money? Like, how do you determine who's good, who's bad?
You know what? That's the best way to ask this question. Just how they play on the field, I guess. And theoretically, if they recruit well, like if they can recruit above the mean at the position or in the region versus kind of what we expect, like a positive VORP in recruiting, or VORC, I guess, replacement coach. But it's funny you say that. So much of it, I guess, now that you're saying that, is just impressions people have. Yeah. And not much beyond it. But I think that's it. It's can they evaluate guys and put them in spots where they need to be? And can they do better than the average Wisconsin coach in terms of what they can bring in?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, a lot of it is just kind of vibes.
Yeah.
And what the coaches say and random comments and what we hear from recruits. So it's really hard to be objective about it. I guess what I want to look at is just kind of the history of Wisconsin assistants going back to even Alvarez. So I think there's two philosophies that we've seen coaches have at Wisconsin. So the first philosophy is Alvarez. So obviously he had a ton of turnover on his early staffs. But then once they got cooking in, 92, 93, 94, he had his guys and he stuck with them. Almost, we can talk about that to the detriment. So towards the end of his career, he is starting to get a lot of pressure for having his buddies coaching that weren't very good. But still, he kept Palermo for 15 years. He had Huber at offensive line for over a decade. Henry Mason, wide receiver coach before he had health issues, was there for 11 years. For better or worse, kept Kevin Cosgrove for 13 years. So he kind of had his core guys, and then he would fill in throughout, kind of around them. So, and it's also interesting just looking, he was constantly cycling through defensive back coaches and constantly cycling through linebacker coaches. It kind of is similar to today. Like, I feel like defensive back coaches are kind of the highest turnover spots, even wide receivers. So those guys are always going to come and go and have been going for 30 years now. So he kind of had the philosophy of getting his core guys and then working around them. And then I'd argue Chris had the same thing, for better or worse. So he had, Jim Leonard at defensive coordinator, Joe Rudolph at offensive line, Bob Bostad wherever he could get them. So he kind of had his guys who, for better or worse, their level was they wanted to be an assistant coach and they didn't really have larger aspirations to move on, look for different spots at either, moving up to defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, or trying to get the best contract at different schools. They were kind of happy to be an assistant at Wisconsin. Definitely worked out. But then you have on that kind of the opposite. And I've always had this long theory that Fickle is BLM 2.0. You have your former meathead, Big Ten player, turn coach. So a lot of similarities, but I also think their coaching staff philosophy is really the same too. So when you think back to Brett's early staffs, he had Chris Ash, Charlie Partridge were kind of the core guys, so brought in Bostad. He had Joe Rudolph as a tight end coach when he was in his early 30s, brought in Thomas Hammock. So he seemed much more focused on getting younger guys on the way up. And not necessarily, and younger can be, it can be 30s, early 40s. It's not like he's hiring 20-year-olds, but he's looking to get guys on his way up. So that led to some really good and great staffs. So, I mean, it's insane if you look at the, say, 2011 staff. He had Chris Ash, Charlie Partridge, and he had Paul Christ at offensive coordinator, Bostad, Rudolph, Thomas Hammock, kind of 6 guys there that could work wherever they wanted to.
4 head coaches.
Yeah, and future head coaches. So he was kind of rolling there, and you're going to get kind of a higher ceiling. But also you had the turnover, and that obviously drove Brett crazy with guys leaving, but that was kind of part of the gig. We're seeing the same thing with Fickle already. I mean, you got Brown leaving, Hitchler, Scruggs just in year 1. Again, not anything that Fickle did wrong. He's just getting guys on the way up. And when you get guys on the way up, you're going to have them leave. Same thing, even you can look at as, new hires with, Grinch is probably not going to be here for that long. Whitlow probably won't be here for that long. Kenny Guyton, who knows, same kind of trajectory. So I just think it's interesting that we kind of are going back in time with Fickle's assistant coaches strategy versus, what we saw with Chris and Alvarez, which were very similar. So I guess that's my overall take, is just how the philosophy for assembling a staff can be pretty telling and more interesting to me than what an individual assistant does. So I think we're kind of going back in time with, the 2006 to 2012 era assistants with Fickle. So we'll see. I'm not making a judgment. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, that's kind of my point. And I have a spreadsheet to prove it.
Yeah, you do. And you have it color coded, which I think is the most interesting part. You know what? I'll put a link in the show notes somewhere. Probably put it on the Patreon if people want to see it. And we'll write up a little explanation of what everything is key. But I'm really curious to me, I am really hesitant to compare anything back to Alvarez at this point, just because the football environment is so weird. Like, I mean, how many wide receiver, like Henry Mason was there for what? He would have stayed here for 20 years if he didn't get sick or what. I mean, I know something happened. He couldn't coach on the field and they had him in like a behind the scenes role for a long time. But you had him, you had, Brian White how long was Brian White around? Half a decade. I feel like there aren't that many guys who are like that. And it would be, I'd be curious to look at, I don't know, Hayden Fry's staff. I guess they're kind of similar in that they kept the guys around, but I think that's more of a function of the era to a degree, don't you? It just wasn't as much jumping around. Guys moved up, but they didn't jump around that much.
Yeah, for scale, for sure. A guy staying 6 years as a position coach, 2024 is probably, I don't know, equivalent to someone staying 12 years back in 1994.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're never going to have position coaches stay for a decade plus, or rarely. But yeah, just, again, scale-wise, I think they match up, whereas I think we're always going to have goal assistants. We're going to have turnover every year as long as he is trying, hiring how he is, which is fine, of course, but I think that's what we'll see.
Yeah, Alex Grinch to me is still just Justin Wilcox in a different, he's a reskinned Justin Wilcox or Mark D'Onofrio. Mark D'Onofrio is kind of the same thing too. A higher profile guy that got knocked down a peg that, is not staying around long, and that's okay. But so I think what you're basically saying, if I was to draw a conclusion, and what does this mean? Is it that just figure you're going to see 2.5 guys out every year or 3.5 guys out type of thing?
Yeah, I don't think that's a controversial opinion. I don't know if you agree with that. I think we're going to see turnover. Yeah. Part of it Fickle, part of it just how college football is these days. So
yeah. If Tressel is good this year, how much longer is he around? Is my thought. A guy like that. Longo, same thing. If he can sort it out, how long is he around? Although I still don't get why he left North Carolina to come to Madison. But if that's what his ultimate goal was, I don't see how this helped him. But whatever. I don't have any theories there.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing I was just looking at too is just, and the spreadsheet has just guys in red. So these are guys that, when they left Wisconsin, they were never getting a better job. So I'm not picking on them, but Mickey Turner, Ben Strickland, Bill Bush, your guy, Jeff Jenick, who you loved and were heartbroken when he left.
Yeah.
Just a handful of guys like that. And, most staffs have at least 1 or 2 guys on there. Kind of the peak staffs like Alvarez from 93 to 98 had no guys like that. Once Brett got cooking from 08 to 08, 09 and 10, he didn't have any guys like that. So yeah, it's just kind of interesting to see every staff usually has one or two guys that are, this is the best job they're going to get. Again, not picky. They could be perfectly great coaches. Like we all love Chris Herring's special teamwork, but again, he was never going to get, this was the best job he's going to get. So, and there hasn't been, so far, we've really only had one on Fickle, and that's obviously Bicknell is probably not going to be at this level again. But I'm curious to see if he kind of stays out of the red, with his hires.
Yeah, maybe that's kind of his theory. He's looking for up and comers who are hungry. So, All right, we'll see. The other little piece, and I guess there's a little sort of tertiary thing today with the new signing day stuff, but I'm not going to touch that yet. It's too early to kind of know. The playoff format came out, right? So we're going to have 12 teams in the playoff next year. The way it's going to work, the 5 highest ranked conference champions get auto bids, which I think is kind of weird, seeing as we have 4 power conferences now. And one of them is, I guess it's the G5 and the other ones, but and then 7 at-large bids. The top conference champions get the 1 through 4. So theoretically, the Power 4 get a home game, and they get a bye. Or sorry, not a home game. They get the bye. And then 5 to 12 play with the higher seed, starting at 5 versus 12, 6, 11, yada, 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 down to 8 and 9 at home, which is kind of cool. The only other thing that I kind of noticed about it is it seems insanely long. Like the playoffs are a month for 3 rounds, which seems crazy to me. It's like over a month because it's going to be a first round around like the Bahamas Bowl in December 20th or whatever, but the Poland or Weed Eater Bowl or whatever you want to call it. The quarters replace the New Year's Six Bowls. So like the Rose Bowl is going to be a quarterfinal game now. You have semis on what used to be the national title, right? Because January 9th was basically when the game was played this year. And then January 20th, 11 days later, you have the title. So it means, it's not really relevant to our conversation, Badger specifically, but like, it just seems weird to me that this playoff is as long as it is. Like you're going 11 days between games, but that's neither here nor there. But the playoff schedule comes out. What does this mean for you? Because to me, like, how do we judge Badger football seasons going forward? My assumption from now on is just going to be, if you want to say the Badgers had a successful season, it's they had to make the playoff, right? Is there any other way that, like, sort of like where they are in the pecking order, which is like, okay, this was a good season. It was make the playoff, right?
God, I go back and forth on this. Is it make the playoff or just be in the playoff consideration? It kind of depends on where. Right now, God, I would take a 9-win season, So it kind of depends on where they are. I feel like, if we're in the mix, and I know you love talking basketball here, so I just want to make a quick basketball analogy. So, if you look at like the Badger basketball program, they did absolutely nothing in the 70s and 80s. As they got closer to the tournament, and I think it was 94 was the first time they made the tournament, everyone was just freaking out. Like, we made the tournament. That's all that mattered, biggest accomplishment ever. And for a while, it was just make the tournament successful season. And then they get a little bit better, and it's, well, we got to make the Sweet 16 or else it's not a successful season. And then they make the Sweet 16 for a while, and it's, well, we got to make the Final Four. It's not a successful season. So I feel like expectations, it's easy for us to sit here now and say, yeah, just make the playoffs. Everyone will be happy. But I think the expectations are going to change over time. And I don't know. I guess short answer, people never be happy. But it's just, what's realistic and what's not. I agree with you that trying to make the playoff is, by all measures, a success. I don't know how often that will happen and how we'll feel about it if we do make it a couple of times, but, get blown out in the first round or something like that.
Well, that's sort of what I'm saying is maybe it's not it's like, that's your aspirational goal, right? Because here's the thing. Like you said, a 9-win season. 9-win season isn't that far from the playoffs. LSU was 9-3 and finished 13th. Like they were 1 out of the playoff. Or 2 out, I guess, because Liberty, like if you use this season as the model, Liberty gets in, which pushes out Oklahoma. So Oklahoma and LSU miss. But 10 is Penn State. Ole Miss is 10-2. Like 9-3 is right on the cusp of that 12 seed, right? So, I guess my proposition is when we talk about successful Badger seasons, it's that sort of ethereal 10-2 thing, right? 10-2, higher end bowl. Well, that's the playoffs. Right. So You're hoping every third year you're in the playoffs, I guess, is my thought. Like every third year you should have a high end season for Wisconsin. Is that what we should be expecting? or what we are hoping for. I'm still trying to sort of wrap my head around that, because the other part is going to be 9-3 is going to be a much harder 9-3 for the Badgers now too. So you're going to add, a team or two in there that will make a 9-3, if they can get it, all the more impressive. But to your question, I was trying to make the comparison. I'm using a very dated reference. You're old enough to know this, but for younger listeners, probably not. Is like being Marty Schottenheimer. If you're the Badger head coach, is that going to be enough? And for people who don't know, Marty Schottenheimer was the Chiefs coach from for a decade, from 1990 to 2000, I think, more something around that. And he did the same thing basically every season. He would go 10-6 or 11-5, or actually sometimes it was 15-game seasons, but you get the point. And they would lose in the first round of the playoffs every year. Every year. I mean, I think he was 2-10. He has some ridiculously terrible playoff record, 2-10 or 2-8 or something like that. But for a decade, he made the playoffs basically every year. And my question is, are Badger fans, if a guy is consistently getting an 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 seed, and then maybe winning one of those games, he goes 1-5 in the playoffs, what does that do for fans? I'm very curious to know what people are going to think of that as Badger fans. If that's going to be okay with them, because there's so many variables in the way this thing is set up now that I don't really get, and the NFLization of college football is coming, and how we look at this team, because it's always going to be tied to the larger picture now as we move towards 2 power conferences effectively. I don't know. Do you think that's going to fly? Because I kind of think people are going to get tired of it, and I don't think they should.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, it will fly, just because, I don't know, it's similar, again, to go back to basketball, when Bo Ryan had a stretch of 10 years where he was doing everything but winning in the tournament. He was at no point in danger of losing his job, and 75%, maybe 90% of Badger fans are over the moon to have him, but you had the very vocal 10% that were very mad. Saw the same thing with Bielema in the Rose Bowls, and you'd get there every year but could never win. So I think it's going to be similar to that, where we're overall happy about it, but there's always going to be a very loud, you don't care about winning, the things we see on Twitter all the time, when you have a very good program, but they can't get over the hump. So I agree with you. I think there's going to be a lot, and this is best case scenario. God, I would love to be complaining about losing in the playoffs every year. But yeah, I think there's going to be, you always have your vocal complainers no matter what they do. But I think big picture, big picture, I think they would be fine making the playoffs every 3 years. I don't know what the number is. Hard to say.
I like that. So every 3 years, if every 3 years you're the 10 seed and you lose, that's the new losing in the Rose Bowl at 10-2, effectively. Yeah, you're right. That's a good way to think of it. I mean, it really is. It's the same thing. You're in the same sort of spot in the pecking order. But all right. Last thing before we go, because I have kept you very long here, Andy. I have one listener question. We actually have a couple more in the hopper that I think Max and I will get to at some point, but I thought this one was kind of interesting because it ties into our assistant talk a little bit. But the Red Shed, the bar is back to ask questions. I always, again, like it when I'm getting questions from a bar.
Well, and then can I add some Madison flavor? The bar is closed.
I know.
But they moved, and the new location isn't open yet. I don't know. I walk by it every time I go to a basketball game, and it's just not open. So
where is it?
It's on State Street, kind of by where the pub used to be, which is now called something else. I don't know. I feel like I'm too old for this, and I know you are too. But it's on State Street somewhere.
But the Red Shed is not a State Street bar.
I agree. I agree.
Concerned. It needs to be sort of off. But yes, so the Red Shed asks, how much pressure is on Phil Longo this season? If Tyler Van Dyke doesn't pan out, is his job in jeopardy? I'm curious what you think.
I think absolutely. No way, right? I think he's got 4 years. I mean, the problem with the offensive coordinator, if you are firing your offensive coordinator, especially with the portal, you can assume that every QB he recruited is gone. So I don't think Fickle has a desire to necessarily start over unless they have a slam dunk thing. I also think it'd be admitting failure on Fickle's side, punting on the OC after 2 years. So I don't think he wants that. I think worst case scenario, maybe he has a couple more years where he's not doing great, and then he kind of takes a job somewhere else on his own without a lot of maybe Fickle doesn't necessarily discourage him from taking a new job in a couple of years, but I don't think it'll ever be a straight firing. And I think he's got at least 4 years, is assuming, all the QBs don't transfer out or, there's not some off field stuff or something like that. So.
Yeah, I think the middle, like sort of your three pieces of evidence there, I think the middle one is the big one. I think Fickle is very much wed to Longo because a big part of what he was doing, it's not the air raid stuff, which again, to your vibes thing, I challenge people who are really angry about the Badgers running the air raid to tell me what's different about the offense other than they are in a shotgun. Like that, because that's really about it. But that point aside, like I think so much of Fickle's sell in this thing was the marriage of Phil Longo. And like if they're bad this year, I don't think he has a lot. Like honestly, I don't if they're, in this sort of bowl eligible record again, and then he goes out and fires Longo, like I don't think he has a lot of, I don't know what you want to call it, momentum or clout or legitimacy within the program, like with McIntosh and within the department. And honestly, I guess within the coaching circles to like pull a big guy. Like who's he going to pull? I feel like after that, it gets weird. And it's like, are you going to reorient the offense? Because you've done a 2-year turnover on the offense. I mean, the offense was more last year. The defense, I guess, is this year with the way they turn the roster in the portal, right? I feel like you cannot, sort of you're midstream here. And I don't think you can do anything, not just with the quarterbacks, but just with, okay, if you're going to go back to a more traditional pro style offense, you're going to slice out some receivers and add some bodies where, I don't know, but it would be too much. Like, I think he is sinking or swimming with Longo no matter what.
And I agree. I mean, how much of I feel like 95% of the criticism is just short yardage stuff, not having a QB under center. And I got to tell you, just being at a game, every time they do a short yardage shotgun, you can just hear the old people just heads exploding. So how much of the offense last year what percentage would you put on Longo and what percentage would you put on personnel stuff happening? Where would you break that down?
Oh, the needle swings way more towards personnel. I mean, I think it's kind of telling that they were crappy in short yardage and Luke Fickell is paying a guy not to be the offensive line coach anymore. Like, I think there is maybe not causation, but there sure is correlation there that doesn't pass the sniff test for me. And it's an offensive line that wasn't that great last year either, right? I mean, some guys had trouble adjusting, like Nelson, and then got better as the season went on. But like, I do think there is an issue of development on that offensive line that we saw coming into the season. So I don't think putting the quarterback 5 yards behind the line to just be where the running back is to hand him the ball is any different because the running back's starting back there regardless. So yeah, the shotgun stuff doesn't matter. So by extension, I don't think it's Longo is bad at calling the plays. I think it is, they didn't have the bodies there. Same thing with the defense, right? I mean, I feel like the defense was such a clearer example of, no, I don't think the issue is that Mike Tressel doesn't know how to coach or Luke Fickell doesn't know how to coach defense. They just didn't have the guys to do what they wanted. And it became pretty clear, especially the way they hit the portal for bodies there. I mean, maybe the optimistic take is it's not like they went out and grabbed a bunch of offensive linemen, right? Not really. I mean, how are you going to get a good offensive lineman in the portal is another question. It's kind of like getting D linemen, but not the fact that they weren't out there hunting a ton is maybe a good sign. I guess maybe the flip side of that is the fact that they brought in 5 offensive linemen, although I think that has more to do with the scholarship distribution in the position than anything, but maybe is the flip side of that. But yeah, I'm not worried about Long. I mean, LSU's defense stunk, but that offense clicked. When they were playing against somebody who was not great, again, I'll admit it, but like when they had the opportunity to showcase what they were, they looked like, oh, okay, this is what they're supposed to be. So no, I'm not out on Longo in any way.
And I will say, like, even when it didn't work, I got what he was thinking for the most part.
Yeah.
So I don't know that, again, that's more vibes, but even when stuff didn't work, I'm like, I get why you were trying that. I had one complaint, and I'm curious to see how he fixes this last year, but it seemed like he would always look for kind of the counter a little bit too early. So if they did a couple runs that would work well, he would try to do the counter play on, play number 3, and it wouldn't work at all. So that kind of drove people a little bit crazy because, you do 2 plays in a row and they work great. Why do we go into counter? Sometimes it worked really well. I'm just remembering the Minnesota game. Like he did a couple draws with Mordecai, and then he faked a draw and hit Braylon Allen on like a 30-yard pass. But a lot of times he would try to do that counterplay a little bit too early, and it didn't work. And they didn't have any margin for error. So I guess I'm curious to see if that improves or how he changes, if anything there. But yeah, I at least get what he's doing, which is half the battle for me.
All right. Fair enough. At least I get what he's doing is a great way to wrap up a February show, if I may say. So yeah, Andy, thank you again for coming. Again, thank you for coming on here at the end of February. I mean, this was truly your baptism of fire right here.
Great. Yeah. Kickoff specialists, defensive line coaches. This is perfect.
Color-coded spreadsheets. I mean, you passed with flying colors, Andy. I don't know. Max is still kind of on the move next week, so I don't know what I'm going to be doing about a show next week if he's not around. I may go solo. I may get another guest. I mean, I'll give you a break after this one, Andy. I know this was high stress. But yeah, we'll figure something out. Or we may take another week off. But just so you know, we haven't forgotten everybody. And I don't want to do anything too meaty without Max around. Just because that's not fair to Max. So we have a few things in the book cooking on the fire about 4th down stuff with Fickle and some things like that. So that's Andy's other favorite topic is to get.
If you want me to jump in just to scream, I can. I'm available. I don't know if video exists of me from the Ohio State game, but we can look for it.
Well, I thought I'd throw that right at the end just to see if I could get a rise out of you, and mission accomplished, Andy. Again, thanks for coming on, Andy. You were great, and until the next time.
Enjoy the conversation? Head on over to buckaroundpodcast.com to find all the ways to connect with the show, links to our Patreon page, and feeds for every major podcasting platform. We want to thank each and every one of our patrons. You make this podcast possible. This has been The Buck Around, Badger football analysis from a fan perspective.